queek, or as we locally say, to each his own. The typical phrase we use to clarify that other people are free to like different things. It's probably the best way to understand how it's possible that the flagships of two different companies can cost the exact same money and then offer a completely different approach to that ideal flagship and then be just as successful. On one corner we have Samsung, which adequately calls its phone the Ultra. This is not just a case of more is better. Instead, consider this to be the extreme that the name actually embodies. And then on the other, we have Apple, which also properly names its phone the Max. It's the maximum amount of iPhone you can get, which is also a contradiction since Apple favors the principle of less is more. Less is cameras, but here's where numbers can be deceiving. Yes, the Max innovates with IBIS and offers a better primary camera than the other iPhones, but if you do the math, the sensor is more of a match with the S21 Plus. The Ultra takes cameras so far beyond what the iPhone can do that it's hard to even compare them. But the question is if the results speak as highly as those numbers. While outdoors, I tend to drift more to the iPhone's photos because of the balance and dynamic range, where the Galaxy tends to be a bit brighter, even if it still preserves the detail. But yeah, once you punch into 10x, the Galaxy just slays the iPhone. I don't use zoom photography all the time, but the Ultra just makes that so compelling, given how much detail it can provide up to 30x digital. Though yeah, forget about the 100x here too. As for the iPhone, just stick to 2.5 and you'll be fine. While indoors and when doing close-ups, the opposite happens mostly, with the Galaxy providing better dynamic range, though bokeh seems to be a very close call even with the sensor differences. And yes, RAW photography is available on both for extra flexibility in post. At night, I'm gonna drift to prefer the Galaxy because it handles lens reflections better. I'm not a fan of how either phone performs on anything other than the primary, but clearly Samsung's hardware is doing a superior job. Now, selfies are a mixed bag, where I prefer the detail on the Galaxy so long as you don't have too much light, and I also like its crop for portraits, but then Apple's Deep Fusion can really balance photos better in most scenarios. All this being said, in video, I hate to say this, but the iPhone still wins. Through the primaries, both do a comparable job in stabilization, and the Galaxy's video is good, but the iPhone's dynamic range is just too good. It handles shadows and highlights far better, which results in far less grain being shown. I'd say it's a closer call if we measured selfie video, with the Galaxy going closer in brightness, but not enough to hide the grain it's showing, while the iPhone adapts to lighting in ways that's really hard for others to still compete today. To conclude, I think it's easy to see which phone came out on top. Samsung wins the hardware. It provides a ton of added functionality in the software, and in everything but video, it also owns the camera department. Now, maybe what's interesting to consider is that it won, but not by much.
Mo and Kirk out with one of these rigs, one of these things right here, and they placed one of each flagship in this unit and went into the wilderness for some reason in order to test each of these two flagship level cameras without me knowing which is which. That's why I have a video right here of an A/B of both of these devices, and I'm gonna have to try to tell the difference, not knowing which is which. I'm going to examine each frame, attempting to distinguish the attributes that I like on each of the two cameras. Samsung went for the massive sensor, 108 megapixels. They also have the periscope style zoom, so yes, there's some features on this side that are not exactly here. However, the iPhone approach is to have a lower megapixel count and to do more work, I suppose, after the fact with the neural processing and all the rest of it. We have tons of RAM, up to 16 gigabytes inside of the Ultra. The high-end model, 512 gigs of storage, so that's comparable across the two. We have a slightly bigger display on the Samsung side, 6.8 inches versus 6.7, and it's a slightly better screen-to-body ratio as well. IP rating is the same across both, but the Samsung device does have a much larger battery, at least on paper. On the iPhone side, you have arguably the best processor in a smartphone at the moment in Apple's latest A14. And then over on the Samsung side, we have the latest Snapdragon. That's the 888. So without further ado, let's get into the video. You're going to watch it along with me, and we're going to discover the differences between the S21 Ultra and the iPhone 12 Pro Max, or we're at least going to try to see if we can tell the difference. First up, we have the ultra wide shot, and immediately we see a significant difference. We have way more black on the image on the left. Definitely more contrast and a shift towards blue, a cooler tone, definitely warmer on the right. I already have my inclination as to which is which. I think the important thing about this test, since you're playing along, is to know that each phone is going to stay on the same side the whole time. So whichever way your brain is trending, then keep that in mind as you attempt to be a detective here. Exposure, I mean, definitely the right-hand side is trying to keep the shadows up to maintain some level of detail. Both images are nice. I think either is acceptable. Even in the foreground here, on the log, on the snow, I feel like I'm getting a little more detail on the image on the left. I'm gonna keep going here. Okay. All right, next up we have the wide image here. It's a similar type of frame. Now the right image has added a little bit of blue in the snow, so it has interpreted this frame a little differently. I mean, if you look at the jacket that Kirk is wearing there, it's certainly darker and more black and more contrasty on the left-hand side. Here we go with telephoto. So this photo is around 3x zoom. It's the first tap on the zoom. This white on the left looks more accurate to me, and there's more detail in the jacket. Huh, that's quite interesting. Let's proceed. Now we're into the video, 4K 30 FPS. Now here we're gonna be looking at a couple things, obviously exposure. Somebody fell. That's the second wipeout you took today. But that's kind of a good test, I guess. It looks quite a bit different. The right one remains a little smoother through your fall. The green is more saturated on the image on the left. It's more muted in the image on the right. However, I've seen this jacket in real life, and I feel like the right one is probably a little more accurate than the left, but it's subtle. It's a subtle difference. Both are really nice 4K video, and even without the extra stabilization turned on. Okay, now the right one is far more stable than the left. And this is with just default settings on the video mode. I see flickering in the snow a little bit. There's an exposure thing happening where the exposure is shifting a little bit. It's struggling a little bit. 4K 60 FPS. Ooh. Oh, wow. So what's interesting here is the footprints in the snow. On the left-hand side, it's tremendously more detail where it's a little bit blown out on the right, or at least tougher to pick up all the details in the snow. The left one just looks a lot higher resolution. I mean, I know that they're both 4K, but it just seems, I don't know if there's some sharpening added there or if it's an exposure choice that's happening automatically in the camera, but certainly the left one is resolving a lot more detail. But I'm still getting a little weird flickery thing as the pan takes place. And the right image still has a greater smoothness to it. Now this is where I'm starting to figure out which is which, because I'm seeing what it's doing with Kirk's complexion. Like, these are quite a bit different, these approaches. He has a lot more color in the image on the left, and he's a lot more pale in the image on the right. Wow. That's a much different approach here. Now I'm a bit screwed up. Now I am a bit screwed up. I'm the only one in here, by the way, that doesn't know which is which, but interesting. Here we get a sense for the depth of field as the focus shifts to the bark. And this is good for an autofocus test as well. Ooh, close focusing test. Interesting. The camera on the right for sure can focus closer. They both can focus pretty close, but the camera on the right can focus closer. Huh. Wow. Ooh, we're gonna check out some portrait mode now. The skin tone, the skin colors, there's a little more yellow on the left and a little more pink on the right. And the focus fall off around the head. And this is not particularly easy because of all the branches and stuff. And I actually noticed a little segment around the ear on the photo on the right where maybe it didn't grab it, and a little section near the jacket as well where it kind of screwed up the portrait mode ever so slightly. Yeah, I think the left one probably nailed it a little bit better. It's both are nice images in different ways. Here we have Mo's version. Whoa, those are, wow. The question is, which is the better image? It depends what you're looking for. If you really like crushed blacks, if you like that really dark black color, the camera on the left almost never gives it to you. The camera on the right brings you there immediately. It's tough. A lot of this is personal taste. The left does have more detail. It does have more detail in the skin. Low light, wow. I mean, the image on the left, for sure. Look at the noise and stuff on the image on the right. I mean, this is so noisy, the image on the right. The image on the left wins. Slow motion. So it's 240 FPS, 1080. There's interesting things that are happening to the exposure here in the indoor environment, especially around color temperature. Oh, this is an interesting clip. The clip on the left is really struggling with exposure. It has blown out his thumb, and the wall is nowhere near black. It's very gray, so there's some guesswork going on there. The right-hand side is a lot more true to life here. Wow, this is a tough challenge right here. Close focus. Oh, so the one on the right has like basically macro. That's on the main camera. The dollar bill is touching the phone. Wow. Super close focus, tremendous detail. I guess the photo on the left is the same range, but it's picking up the grass in the background because it can't focus quite so close. Autofocus. Now this was kind of, there was an autofocus issue sort of plaguing the previous generation Ultra. Looks like it's not there anymore. I think the autofocus is acceptable on both of these at this point. Obviously the left one, the approach is a slower transition between focus points, which some may prefer. It's a more action-like type of footage on the right-hand side. It snaps into focus faster. It's hard. I mean, in certain circumstances, I preferred what was happening on the left. In certain circumstances, I preferred what was happening on the right. Oh, this is harder than I expected it to be honest. It went back and forth. I'm gonna go ahead and guess that the left is the Samsung and the right is the iPhone. The left is the iPhone and the right is the Samsung. Are you sure? Wait a second. The iPhone is on the left, the Samsung is on the right. Wow, interesting. Wow, this is really interesting. I feel one thing that kind of surprised me is how close these have become, and the fact that it wasn't as easy as I thought it would be to tell the difference between the two, at least immediately. The portrait mode maybe should have been the giveaway for me. that once I saw the complexions and I saw that sort of yellowish, more yellowish hue in the skin tones, I probably should have said, okay, that's got to be the iPhone. But the thing that threw me off was the exposure struggling on the snow. I was like, that's got to be the new phone with the new software. And because I had autofocus issues with the last generation of the Ultra, I was like, maybe there's some sort of software problem or update necessary, because that looked really bad to me. But yeah, it's a little bit of this and a little bit of that. I guess maybe that's to be expected when you're talking about 2 leaders in the segment at this, at this type of price point. But I guess I kind of expected the iPhone to do a little better, maybe. If I had to post this picture immediately, I would pick the one on the left. The wide. Here, I think I still take the iPhone photo. That one is tough. Only reason I'm going to give it to the iPhone again is because of the snow being what I perceive to be the color of the snow and the Samsung going blue. Our first video, that was weird, man, because here he falls and Samsung device is super stable. Now, maybe it's just the way you fell. And then you look at this frame here with him laughing, and the face is just so much more detailed on the right-hand side. I'm gonna take, in this video clip, I'm gonna take the Samsung. This one really surprises me. In this case, the iPhone looks a little less natural in the coat color, which I've seen in real life. So I'm gonna take the Samsung one here as well. This 4K 30. Now the running one is really what screwed me up. The iPhone is just going nuts, trying to figure out exposure, and so much so that it would be distracting to have that in your clip. And also in the default stabilization mode, there are more stabilization modes on the Samsung. The right is just a more pleasing, smoother movement. 4K 60 FPS. We have blue snow from the Samsung device again, but I can't accept the flickering. I'm taking the Samsung again. Yeah, I'm taking the Samsung again. It feels like photo mode is going to the iPhone and video mode is going to the Samsung. Because now I'm into portrait mode, and I remember that the iPhone was the superior one there as well. So I give portrait to the iPhone. Night mode, iPhone wins. Slow motion, the hand is blown out. It's just not good looking. Yeah, I mean, the Samsung slow-mo here looks way better. Close focus, we already covered this. It's not even close. It goes to the Ultra model. And then autofocus, where I expected the iPhone to kill, the Samsung is tight now. I think most people can appreciate just fast, find the focus fast. So I give that to Samsung as well in that exact circumstance. And then Samsung gets the bonus because it has the extra cameras. A 10x. I mean, that's ridiculous. That is a really usable 10x. That's optical 10x. 100x is obviously the software coming into play here. You have it if you want to, I don't know, be a weirdo, but and then it can shoot in 8K. Whoa! It can shoot in 8K 24 frames, and that is cinematic. The snow is still blue, but yeah, Samsung wins.
But let's move on to the comparison most of you are here for, which is the cameras. The Ultra has the more eye-catching specs with its 108 megapixel main lens and the new dual telephoto cameras with 100x space zoom. But the Pro Max has some pretty advanced tech with the new sensor shift stabilization and its LiDAR sensor. The iPhone's photos were typically brighter, and I noted in the Ultra review how Samsung seems to be muting the highlights, limiting the dynamic range. The Ultra still shows a higher contrast by lowering the black levels, and there's much more sharpening with Samsung's processing, as you can see here in the ground for example. The iPhone gives the most natural and colour-accurate photos, and Samsung still has this magenta hue with a lot of the Ultra's photos, so whites especially have an unnatural pinkish tinge. The Ultra is prone to oversaturating colours to give more striking and vibrant images, which look good, but obviously comes at the cost of realism. But you can also see here that the iPhone has captured a lot more detail in the leaves. These colour and contrast differences are carried over to the ultra-wide lens, but the iPhone does seem to struggle with processing the colour of grass, often over-brightening it. So this is one subject where the Ultra captures a more realistic image, although the detail in the clouds with the iPhone shot is pretty impressive. The S21 Ultra gave much sharper ultra-wide shots too, and didn't blur and distort at the edges as much as the Pro Max. Samsung's large main sensor brings a shallower depth of field, so you end up with less of your subject in focus, but it does give you this really nice natural blurred background. You can see the Ultra's higher contrast and saturation here too, and also the extra sharpening, which is easier to see if you crop in a bit closer. And this is before you switch on the high-res 108 megapixel mode as well. But I've discussed before that, in reality, this isn't a big advantage over lower megapixel lenses like on the iPhone, because you do have to crop in a lot closer to see the benefit. The Pro Max has captured the more realistic version of the real-life scene, but I do really like Samsung's image processing here, which gives the more pleasing and Instagram-ready photo. The iPhone still leads the field when it comes to HDR, and whilst most situations aren't as extreme as this, I think this shot highlights the main differences pretty well. If you ignore the lens flare at the centre, you can see how the Pro Max was able to bring down the overexposed sun and capture more detail in the sky, but it also retains the true darkness in the shadows of the bushes. The Ultra tries to flatten out the image by over-brightening the shadows, so it doesn't process dynamic range as well. The iPhone tends to perform better in tricky lighting conditions too, and here in this cloudy and rainy day shot, you can see how the colours are much more washed out with the Ultra's photo. The iPhone's Deep Fusion tech excels in situations like this, and you can see how it's captured a lot more detail here. These advantages carry over to the portrait mode as well, and though the portrait effect appears quite similar, you can see the benefit in detail and sharpness because the iPhone is using its telephoto lens, whereas the Ultra is cropping in on the main sensor, which results in quality loss. Samsung has done a better job with the white balance here though, and the Pro Max image is a little bit too warm compared to the real-life scene. But I do think portraits in general look better on the iPhone, and again, that's largely because it's using the more suitable tele lens as opposed to cropping on the main, which the Ultra does. Night mode is fantastic on both of these phones, and they can each make dark scenes look like daytime. I generally found the Ultra had the better performance though, usually bringing out more detail with brighter photos and a higher sharpness. Sometimes this works against the phone and creates unwanted artifacts, so it isn't perfect but mostly works in its favour. The Ultra's white balance was usually better too, so colours were closer to real life, whereas the iPhone sometimes had a yellowish hue. You can see here how it raises the exposure more for the shadows, which can obviously reveal more detail, but again, this can often create unwanted noise as well, whereas the iPhone is more likely to capture the true realistic darkness of the scene. You may also have spotted that the Ultra's photo is a little bit out of focus, and the iPhone did typically focus a lot better and faster in dark conditions, so its LiDAR sensor is an advantage over the Ultra. Sometimes the Ultra just wasn't able to focus at all in situations where the Pro Max could, and this was even more pronounced when switching to the other lenses. LiDAR is a little bit more useful than Samsung's laser autofocus, giving better low-light focusing and depth perception, but also gives more advanced AR features. Samsung's laser autofocus was mainly brought in to fix the focusing issues last year's S20 Ultra had, which it does do quite successfully, but it's not as sophisticated as the iPhone's LiDAR. The Ultra really pulls ahead with the selfie camera, which outspecs the iPhone with its 40 megapixel sensor, although its default mode actually produces lower res images than the Pro Max. However, looking at the results, the Ultra's selfies are pretty much better in every single way. They're much sharper, have more accurate colours and a realistic white balance, and interestingly, have better HDR as well. The iPhone has a warmer tone, as it tends to with portraits, which are normally good for selfies since this flatters skin tones, but it's not as true to life as we see here with the Ultra. The Ultra also has the high-res 40 megapixel mode, but I've talked before in previous videos how this mode is slower and doesn't give noticeable benefits unless you crop in really close. Plus, some aspects are worse than the standard mode, like dynamic range, so this feature isn't a huge advantage over the iPhone. The Pro Max redeems itself a little with the portrait mode, and typically showed greater depth perception to create a better portrait effect, which the Ultra sometimes struggles with. But the Ultra still benefits from the same colour, sharpness and dynamic range improvements we saw with photo mode, so has much better selfie performance overall. When it comes to zoom, the Ultra also has a clear lead, and its new dual telephoto system gives it a much greater optical zoom range than the Pro Max. The iPhone can only zoom optically at 2.5x, so it competes with the Ultra here, but then degrades in quality beyond this up to its maximum zoom of 12x. The Ultra can zoom optically at 10x, so everything up to this point is much higher quality than on the Pro Max, and it even takes some pretty nice looking shots at around 30x. The difference in quality between optical and digital zoom is really apparent at this 10x point. And though the iPhone is struggling and nearly maxed out here, the Ultra handles this just fine, with photos that are much sharper, have better colours, and simply much higher quality. We know its space zoom actually goes up to a crazy 100x, but most shots over 30x lose their quality too much to really be useful. Still, you'd have to crop on the iPhone's photos to match this kind of range, and it simply can't compete with the Ultra's far superior zoom capability. It beats the iPhone at the other end of the zoom range too, with macro mode, automatically switching over to the ultra-wide lens for super close-up photography. This allows you to get macro shots that are just not possible on the iPhone, even if you manually switch to the ultra-wide lens. So the Ultra certainly has the more versatile of the two camera systems. The S21 Ultra is the undisputed king of zoom, but the iPhone is the clear reigning champion of video, and there's still no other phone that can compete with the stability and quality. The Pro Max has better autofocus, especially when tracking moving subjects, and the image was sharper and less noisy than on the S21 Ultra. Video on the Ultra is good, some of the best on Android, in fact. It's just not on the same level as the Pro Max. The same was also true for the selfie video, and I mentioned in the Ultra review how Samsung's selfie video processing this year results in washed out colours and a lack of sharpness that was actually worse than in previous years. The iPhone's video is brighter, smoother, much more detailed, and has richer colours, so it's the clear winner when it comes to video quality. It's also the only camera able to shoot in Dolby Vision HDR, which does look absolutely insane. You can watch this back on your device in true HDR and see immediate results, but I would say that compatibility is fairly limited, and I don't think most people will end up using this. Samsung of course has 8K video, so outspecs the iPhone in terms of resolution. We know already that the 8K quality isn't very good though. It's quite unstable, and we've discussed before how useless the feature ultimately is, since there aren't many 8K displays to watch it back on. I think the iPhone's Dolby Vision option is slightly more useful than 8K, but honestly, I wouldn't really use either. For me, these are the two best camera systems you'll find on a smartphone, and each one has different strengths. The Pro Max has objectively the better cameras. It captures images closer to the real-life scene, shows greater high dynamic range, and has the best video performance. But the S21 Ultra's processing often results in better looking images. It has the superior selfie camera, plus it has a clear advantage when it comes to versatility thanks to its awesome zoom performance.
And as you can see, I want to start with a blind test. Can you tell the difference? Do you know which is which? And also, do you have a preference? Let me know in the comments. To be honest, I reckon you guys have probably got this right, but I can tell you that on the left, photo A is the S21 Ultra with the iPhone 12 Pro Max on the right. So let's go through the different lenses, and if we start with the ultra wide, then switching to the main lens, so now we're at 1x essentially. Now let's move up to 3x zoom, and on the iPhone we actually get a 2.5x optical, so this is going to its maximum optical zoom and then cropping in a little bit to the 3x, but then this is where things get interesting, moving up to 10x. So now this is taking full advantage of the S21 Ultra's new periscope zoom. And what a difference. I mean, even in the foreground actually, look at the bushes, the trees, there's a significant difference in quality. Moving up to 30x zoom, so this is actually the 12.5x max digital zoom of the iPhone cropped in further to 30x. What a difference. You can even see the people on the S21's shot, which just don't appear at all on the iPhone. I took these at the exact same time, side by side. And then finally at 100x, well, they're both kind of bad actually, but one is a lot worse than the other. Okay, this time back in my kitchen, let's go through the zooms one more time. And again, we are getting that quite significant difference in contrast between the two. Samsung say that they've increased the contrast by 50% with the S21 Ultra, which is a bit vague. I mean, from what the numbers there, but clearly you can see the iPhone's got a flatter look. Up to 10x, and the S21's doing a fantastic job. The clarity of this blue microphone is, well, significantly better than the iPhone, and even at 30x, there's bits of noise and artifacting, it doesn't look as clean, but yeah, side by side, no competition really. And finally, 100x, this is actually probably only 5 meters from me or so, so this is very zoomed in at 100x, but yeah, I think the difference speaks for itself. So there's no question really, when it comes to zooming in, the S21 Ultra is the clear winner. But let's talk a little bit more about image quality generally. No edits or filters, I've not adjusted any of these photos, it's fresh out of the camera, but look at the difference in the colors, particularly the grass, and again I would say the S21 is closer to reality. So it's that question of whether you want accuracy or vibrancy. It's interesting because with this flower photo, and if I just quickly jump ahead to this close-up of the petal, is that what you call it? The flower petal, the flower itself? That difference of contrast does give you, a very different look for a start. But the advantage on the iPhone is that you do have more information, more detail in those darker areas. So if you look, say, at the top of the vase, you are seeing a fair bit more on the iPhone. So if you're going to edit this afterwards, you may have sort of more information to work with. Again, quite a difference in color and contrast. This is a tricky one because straight off the bat, I'm kind of leaning towards preferring the S21. It just feels like a more realistic photo. Again, we've got that much brighter look on the iPhone. But actually, if we, Sarah's gonna hate me for this, but if we zoom in on her face, the iPhone is a fair bit sharper. This isn't portrait mode, it's just a regular photo, but we saw that with that initial blind test portrait mode where again, Sarah's features, the facial features were just a little bit clearer. But then switching it to a portrait mode photo, same distance away, but there's this clear pattern emerging of iPhone is brighter and flatter versus a more shadowy, contrasty, slightly cooler look on the S21 Ultra. But looking at these, and also if we just move on to a picture of me, which one do you prefer? Because a lot of this is going to come down to your subjective preference, aesthetics. Do you prefer, bright and airy, Instagram ready, or do you want a more sort of darker, realistic, contrasty look? I'd genuinely love to hear your thoughts, so do let me know along the way what you think in the comments. I think if this video's taught me nothing else, it's that I really could do with a tan, although sadly it's not very likely in the middle of winter here. hate this photo so much, but it is a good demonstration of how different these can be. Straight away, I am drawn to the iPhone, which is much brighter versus the more contrasty, darker and cooler look of the S21. But if I was going to pick my favorite and maybe even post one straight away onto my social media, I would probably go with the iPhone here. This is actually another good example of how well the S21 deals with the dynamic range. I'm not even sure what you call those things in the middle of the road, the sort of median things, but you can see on the S21, again, it's done a much better job at reducing that really overexposed highlight, whereas on the iPhone, the left one in particular, is just, well, completely blown out. Okay, let's switch things around and look at the front selfie camera. I must admit, while the iPhone looks slightly more appealing because again it's much brighter, it's raised all those shadows, I kind of like the more shadowy, realistic look of the S21 Ultra. I think a lot of this is going to come down to your personal preference and which kind of aesthetic you prefer. Now this one's really interesting because I actually took this selfie in direct sunlight, so it was really, really bright on my face. You can see the background in the iPhone shot, that it's much brighter and everything is better exposed, but then my face is completely washed out and lacking in detail. Okay, this is the last photo, I promise, before we look at some video. And I think there's a definite pattern here with the photography. The iPhone goes for a slightly brighter, flatter, warmer, and arguably more pleasing look, whereas the S21 Ultra is consistently a little bit more contrasty, more shadows, and also a cooler color temperature. Let's talk about video, and this is being shot at 4K 30 on both side by side, and this is Fred the cat here, who is very kindly letting me film him, although he usually hates the camera being thrown in his face. And it's interesting to see the stabilization between the two, because the iPhone 12 Max specifically does stand out thanks to its sensor shift stabilization, so we should be looking for a slightly smoother video on the iPhone, but in this good light, I can't tell a massive difference. However, at night things are a little bit different, and you can see while neither are flawless, the iPhone does a much better job at reducing those horrible vibrations that you get with my footsteps. And surprisingly, a bit of a reverse of what we saw with the photos, the iPhone seems to be handling the very bright streetlights and again those weird median road things much better than the Galaxy.
A brief summary. For the front-facing cameras, the S21 Ultra does have a higher resolution, but generally you will be shooting at around 10 megapixels anyway to get the best out of the sensor. And I did find that you have better dynamic range for images, as well as overall better colors, which is quite surprising because traditionally Samsung devices tend to brighten up your face. However, this year Samsung does allow you to completely switch this off, so thank you Samsung for listening. But the iPhone 12 Pro Max does give you sharper results overall, and in my testing it does give you a little bit better edge detection when it comes to portraits. Moving on to the rear-facing cameras, we've got lots of cameras here to work with. We've got ultra-wide, primary, as well as telephoto. The S21 Ultra does have 2 telephoto cameras, 3 times as well as 10 times. Now, of course, if zoom is your thing, then the S21 Ultra will clearly be the choice for you. It has some excellent zoom. Even up to 30 times, you get some really, really good results. You can go all the way up to 100 times, but that's something that's, a little bit too much for my liking, and I don't think you get great results, although they are better than pretty much anything else out there on a smartphone. It's still not something that I would use every day. However, the iPhone 12 Pro Max gives you much better portraits because it actually uses that telephoto lens for portrait photography. The S21 Ultra just uses the primary camera and crops in, which isn't the best solution because it does give you soft results. For the primary cameras, honestly speaking, it is neck and neck. I think you can't go wrong with either of these. They both also take great shots in low light. And for the ultra-wide cameras, I do prefer the iPhone 12 Pro Max because it does give you more natural colors without so much obvious processing. But the S21 Ultra does give you better low light results with the ultra-wide camera, and it also has dual pixel autofocus, which means the ultra-wide camera can also be used as a macro camera and really get up close results. I really do like this feature here on the S21 Ultra. For video, although both of these take great quality video, my overall choice is still the iPhone 12 Pro Max. I just think it gives you more consistent results overall, and it also has HDR with Dolby Vision across all of the cameras, which gives you much better dynamic range. Now, the S21 Ultra does have the ability to shoot 8K. That does crop in and it doesn't give you stabilization, but it's nice to have that option. And you also have a Pro Video mode built in, so you can start using this straight away and tweaking your settings. The iPhone 12 Pro Max, if you do want Pro Video settings, you will have to get a third-party app. Now, I do want to emphasize that both of these have excellent cameras, some of the best out there right now. I think it's just going to come down to your personal preference.